the 2-2.
The Toronto Blue Jays closed out the 1993 season in the most electric way possible, with a walk-off homer, thanks in large part to Cabeza and the Crime Dog, which sounds like a really cool 70s buddy film. On December 5th, 1990, the Blue Jays engineered a blockbuster trade, sending Tony Fernandez, aka Cabeza, and Fred McGriff, of course the Crime Dog, to San Diego for Roberto Alomar and Joe Carter, who would hit the homer to walk off the 93 season. Welcome to Transaction Action. I need to spend a bit more time on this first deal because it's one of the biggest trades of the 90s, if not the biggest. We've got four well-known players, all in their prime. Fernandez was one of the top shortstops in baseball the previous 5 years, and coming off a 4.5 WAR season. He was going into his age 29 year and would decline quickly, but still be a solid player for years. Fred McGriff was coming off 3 straight monster seasons, but first base prospect John Olerud had already started to prove himself in the bigs with a solid 1990 season at DH. Joe Carter is a guy that stat bozos like me like to say is overrated. He was bad defensively and never took a walk, but he did have good power and was, by all accounts, a great RBI guy.
This guy's a good RBI guy.
His 1990 was a down year, maybe one of the most empty 100 RBI seasons in history. Carter slashed 232, 290, 391 in his one season in San Diego. But he still managed to rank 17th in the MVP race, so that shows you how well he was thought of at the time. And that was because he knocked in 115 runs, cementing his place in the shamanic order of guys who know how to drive in runs. This primarily involves batting in the middle of the order behind good hitters who are on base all the time. In this case, Bip Roberts on base 375, Roberto Alomar on base 340, Tony Gwynn on base 357, and Jack Clark on base 441. Anyway, his tepid slash line mixed with his subpar defensive value in center? Led to a negative WAR total for Carter. But the Blue Jays got a lot more value out of him with a positional move to corner outfield. He put up one of his best seasons in 91 and then was a very good free-swinging slugger in the middle of a great lineup in the 92 and 93 seasons. And the biggest piece of this trade was the least proven one at the time. Roberto Alomar, at 22 years old, had put up over 12 WAR in 3 seasons in San Diego, but his offensive numbers weren't indicative of how great he would become in Toronto. It's pretty safe to say the Blue Jays got the better end of this trade. Alomar was terrific for 5 years for them, while Carter was a solid contributor who had the biggest hit in Toronto history. Oh, and they won 2 World Series. Meanwhile, McGriff was excellent in 2.5 years in San Diego before being traded for nothing. Like, who are these guys? And Fernandez, like I said, declined but was still good, and then was traded back to the Blue Jays mid-season of 93 in exchange for journeyman outfielder Darren Jackson. And Fernandez immediately went nuts in Toronto, slashing 306, 361, 442 in 94 games at short. The next most significant trade for this team happened in 1990, when the Jays sent mediocre outfielder Junior Felix and utility man Luis Sojo to the Angels in exchange for Devon White. Clearly a huge win for the Jays, as White was already a 2-time Gold Glove winning center fielder in Anaheim, but he would become one of the most valuable players for the Blue Jays for the next 3 seasons. The Blue Jays bought low on White, who was coming off a horrible season in which he slashed 217, 290, 343, and got demoted to AAA. Another key trade happened way back in 1987 when the Jays dealt utility infielder and tragic figure Mike Sharperson, who we talked about in our Dead Guys episode, to the Dodgers for a 21-year-old pitching prospect who wouldn't debut until 91. Juan Guzman, who would become a consistent and sometimes elite part of the Jays rotation for 8 seasons. The Jays would acquire their closer back in 1986 when they dealt veteran starter Doyle Alexander to the Braves for Dwayne Ward. They would also reacquire another key part of their bullpen in mid-season of 92 when they dealt outfielder Rob Ducey and catcher Greg Myers to the Angels in exchange for former Blue Jays draft pick Mark Eichhorn. In 1989, the Blue Jays picked up a key swingman for the 93 squad when they dealt Jesse Barfield to the Yankees for Al Leiter, a guy whose career really stumbled out of the gates before getting going in Toronto in 93. Barfield had a couple more excellent slugging seasons left in him for the Yankees before a steep decline. Mid-season of 91, the Jays made a big trade to acquire Tom Candiotti, along with outfielder Turner Ward from Cleveland, in exchange for outfielders Mark Whiten and Glenn Allen Hill, and pitcher Denny Boucher. Candiotti would leave in free agency after the season for LA, but Ward would be a sub-replacement level bench bat for the 93 Jays, while Hill, Whiten, and Boucher would go on to varying levels of MLB success. And of course, the Jays made a big splash at the trade deadline in 1993, dealing pitcher Steve Carsey and outfielder Jose Herrera for a half season of Ricky. Not bad. Ricky underwhelmed down the stretch for Toronto, but made up for it with an excellent World Series where he on-based .393 in the leadoff spot. There were a load of free agent signings as well, including Paul Molitor, Danny Cox, Dave Stewart, and Jack Morris. Okay, so now it's time to get a bit nutty with it with our What If They Did Nothing segment. As you just saw, the Blue Jays made out like bandits on these trades, so this is going to be tough, like downright impossible. We have to drop Roberto Alomar, and there's no clear replacement. We keep Fernandez, adding his .1 WAR from his time in 1993 before coming back to the Jays. Ricky, Devo, and Joe Carter are all gone, as is Paul Molitor, who we do get to replace with Fred McGriff at DH. Other than our backup catcher, Randy Ornor, we lose our whole bench, which actually is not that big of a deal as this bench outside of Knorr accounted for negative 2.7 WAR. We can add back in Mark Whiten to start in right field and put Glenn Allen Hill, Rob Ducey, and Mike Sharperson on the bench, all of whom at least provide some positive value. We can also add Derek Bell, who had been dealt prior to the 1993 season to San Diego for Darren Jackson, the guy who was then dealt for Tony Fernandez in season. Bell, unfortunately, was a sub-replacement level starter in 93, mainly due to him playing out of position in center where his glove was not up to snuff. We'll throw him in left where maybe he'll be less of a drag, although for this exercise, we've got to just take the negative .4 hit. We lose Guzman in the rotation, as well as free agents Dave Stewart and Jack Morris, who kind of cancel each other out anyway. We lose a lot of value in the bullpen, too. Dwayne Ward, Eichhorn, and Al Leiter as a swingman combined for 6.3 WAR, and they also lose free agents Danny Cox and Tony Castillo, who combine for another 3.1. We do get to add Steve Carsey and Denny Boucher back in, who together create half of one pretty good starter, basically approximating Leiter's value. So yeah, that's looking pretty rough. We'll have to supplement this with some free agent signings. First, let's add back in some of the free agents we dropped. These are all the guys it would still make sense for the team to sign in this scenario. There's 4 that don't make sense. With McGriff locked in at DH, Molitor is out. Also, with a full season of Tony Fernandez and with Sharperson able to play any infield position, there's no reason we need Dick Schofield, Alfredo Griffin, and Luis Sojo. So we'll drop Griffin and Sojo. We can also drop Darnell Coles because I think we'd want to spend a bit more to upgrade our bench there. Coles had been a sub-replacement level guy since 1989, and with the money we're saving elsewhere, why would you get a no-upside vet like him? So that means we're signing Schofield, Dave Stewart, and Jack Morris in the rotation, as well as Danny Cox and Tony Castillo in the bullpen. Okay, so the money we're saving from the players dropped from the roster is $26.3 million. The guys we're bringing onto the roster add just $7.3 million. So that means we can just go ahead and sign Barry Bonds and Greg Maddux and call it good, right? Well, let's try to be somewhat realistic here. First off, we're only going to look at the off seasons before 92 and 93, and we're going to ignore any free agents who re-signed with their current team, like Lou Whitaker or Kirby Puckett. Bonds wasn't going anywhere but SF, so we can rule him out. Maddux, I guess the Jays could have gone after, but what about another elite starter who the Jays already had but let get away? David Cone, who had helped lead the Jays to their first championship when he was acquired mid-season of 92 from the Mets in exchange for prospect Jeff Kent. And I know what you're thinking, you could just put Jeff Kent on the 93 roster at second base instead of Alomar. But no. Because neither Kent nor Cone were on the 93 squad, this trade does not come under the purview of this ridiculous exercise. We gotta have rules, guys. And anyway, Kent wasn't very good in 93. However, I will say that the Jays might not have made this deal for Cone at the deadline if they hadn't made the trades for Alomar, Carter, and White, because who knows if they'd even have been in contention in 1992. But we don't need to get into the weeds on all that right now. So it is true that Cone returned to his hometown of Kansas City and became the highest average annual value pitcher in baseball. But if the Royals could afford that contract, the Blue Jays could afford that contract. And as far as the hometown nostalgia aspect, I don't know. Cone had already come up with the Royals and been dumped to the Mets for a backup catcher. I don't doubt the pull of home had some draw for him, but the fact that it took the biggest pitching contract in history to bring him back there tells me the Jays could have outbid KC. And Toronto would end up paying the final year of this contract when they traded again for Cone before 1995, absolutely fleecing the Royals. The Royals traded David Cone twice, and all they got was Ed Hearn and Chris Steins. Brutal. So anyway, let's say the Jays get Cone, but have to kick in an extra mil to do so. And Cone gives you a 7.2 WAR season in 93. We definitely also need a closer, so let's add Jeff Russell, a mustache guy who was coming off a big year with Texas and Oakland in 92 and signed with Boston for 2.2 mil. He put up 1.4 WAR in 93. We need a second baseman, so we'll take Harold Reynolds, who left Seattle to sign with Baltimore for $1.7 million and put up a 1.7 WAR season. Then in center, we're going to sign Ellis Burks, who left the Red Sox for the White Sox after 92, signing for $2 million. And we'll upgrade the bench by signing veteran Lonnie Smith instead of Darnell Coles. Smith was signed by the Pirates prior to 93 for $1 million and put up 2.2 WAR in a part-time role. Okay, we've got one more bench spot abdicated by Luis Sojo, but we've already got about 160 too many plate appearances on this fictional team, mainly because of the outfielders, so we'd probably have to shave some playing time away from the sub-replacement Derek Bell. However, we are short on innings pitched on this fictional bullpen, so we're going to add a quality innings eater and another guy from the 92 championship team that the Jays front office let walk in free agency. Glasses guy Tom Henke, who signed with Texas for $3.8 million a year. Pretty hefty deal for a reliever at the time, but we've got the budget, so let's lock in a super consistent bullpen arm. Henke put up 74 innings in 93 and 2.2 WAR. So there we go. This is not quite as good of a team, but the 93 Jays won their division by 7 games, so I think this team still wins the AL East. Okay, here we go. Okay, I was right. They only won 91 games, but still took the division. That's cool. Wait, is that Candlestick Park? Oh wow, so those 103-win Giants actually made it to the postseason in this timeline.
The tying run in scoring position, and the winning run at first base as Joe Carter comes up. So now the spotlight's on Joe. Joe Carter, who produced 121 runs batted in the 93 season. Here's the pitch on the way, a swing and a belt. Left field, way back. Touch 'em all, Joe. You'll never hit a bigger home run in your life.
Tom Cheek's a little too excited about that homer, but hey, that's the multiverse of madness for you, baby. Anyway, sorry I messed that up for you Blue Jays fans, but hope you enjoyed the video anyway. Please like and subscribe for more transaction action.